I never believed fairy tales could be real until I got my very own evil stepmother. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Kimberly, and my childhood was what most people would call normal, maybe even lucky. My parents were successful businesspeople, and we lived in a beautiful two-story house in New York. Dad worked hard to build his company from scratch, while Mom had her own interests. She was hardly ever home, always out with her friends, especially her best friend, Julie. They were inseparable, getting their nails done, having long lunches at fancy cafes, and shopping at expensive stores. I remember sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework alone while Dad heated up another microwave dinner. "Where's Mom?" I'd ask, even though I already knew. "She's out with Julie again, sweetheart," Dad would say, trying not to sound sad. Then he'd add, "But hey, let's make this dinner special. I got your favorite ice cream for dessert." Dad always tried his best to make things okay, but even he couldn't stop what happened when I was 8. That day is still crystal clear in my mind. Mom came home late, as usual, but instead of sneaking off to her room, she called for a family meeting. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice calm in a strange way. "I've fallen in love with someone else. We're moving to Europe next month. You can have full custody of Kimberly." Just like that, my mom disappeared from my life. The next day, she packed her things and left, leaving behind a heartbroken dad and a confused 8-year-old who couldn't understand why her mom didn't want her. That's when Julie started coming around more often. At first, I was happy to see her. She was familiar, a connection to my mom. She cooked dinner for us, helped me with homework, and cleaned the house. She was everything Mom hadn't been. Dad seemed happier whenever she was around. A few months later, they started dating, and 7 months after Mom left, Dad announced they were getting married. I remember feeling so happy and relieved. Julie had been so kind and caring. Maybe she could be the mother I'd been missing. "Are you happy about this, Kimberly?" Dad asked after telling me about their engagement. "Yes," I said, nodding with excitement. "Julie's nice. She takes care of us." The wedding was beautiful, and Julie looked amazing in her white dress. During the reception, she hugged me and whispered, "We're going to be such a happy family." And I believed her. Oh, I really believed her. While they were on their honeymoon, I stayed at Grandma's house, Dad's mom. Those were the last truly peaceful days I'd have for a long time. When I came back from Grandma's, I knew right away that something had changed. As soon as I walked through the door, I felt it. Julie was sitting at the kitchen table, sitting up straight with her hands folded neatly. Dad was there too, looking uncomfortable. "Kimberly," Julie said. Her voice didn't have its usual warmth. "We need to talk about some changes." I sat down, still wearing my backpack. Dad looked at the floor, avoiding my eyes. "Your father and I have been talking about how you're being raised," Julie said, her eyes locked on me. "I've noticed some troubling similarities between you and your mother." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. "The way you act, your attitude. It's clear you need more structure and discipline." She turned to Dad. "Don't you agree, honey? We don't want her turning out like her mother." I looked at Dad, hoping he'd stand up for me. But he just frowned a little and said, "Well, maybe a little more structure could help." Julie patted his hand quickly. "Don't worry, darling. You're so busy with work. Let me handle this." And just like that, my life completely changed. The next day, Julie introduced her new rules. "First, my clothes. We'll only shop at sales from now on," she said. "Designer clothes are a waste of money for a growing girl." But that was just the start. The next weekend, when Dad usually gave me my weekly allowance, Julie stepped in. "About your pocket money," she said, smiling in a way that didn't feel friendly. "From now on, you'll have to earn it. Straight A's only. If you get even 1B, no allowance for the week." But Dad I started to protest, but Julie cut me off. I started to argue. "Your father agrees with me," Julie said sharply, cutting me off. "Don't you, dears?" Dad, focused on his work laptop, barely looked up. "Listen to Julie, Kimberly. She knows what's best," he said absent-mindedly. The rules got stricter every week. Julie even started keeping a notebook where she wrote down every little thing I did wrong. One morning, I left for school without making my bed. Into the notebook it went. Left a glass on the counter instead of putting it in the dishwasher? In the notebook. Homework done but not put neatly in my folder? Another mark. Every Monday, she'd sit me down and go through her list. Bed unmade on Tuesday. Dishes left out on Saturday. Room not vacuumed on Sunday, she'd read with a smug tone. Then she'd close the notebook and say, "Well, no pocket money this week either. Maybe you'll try harder next week." It felt like my old life was slipping away, replaced by endless rules and punishments. But the worst part wasn't the rules. It was how Julie had changed. She wasn't the kind, caring woman I thought she was. Now, she seemed to enjoy pointing out my mistakes. And my dad? The man who used to stand up for me had become a silent bystander. He was always too busy with work to notice what was happening at home. I tried talking to Dad about it, hoping he'd listen. One evening, I caught him in his home office when he wasn't on a call. "Dad, can we talk?" I asked. He barely looked up from his computer. "What is it, Kimberly?" "I'm really busy right now. It's about Julie and all these rules. Don't you think they're a bit much?" He sighed and finally stopped typing. "Look, honey, I know things have changed, but Julie is doing all the hard work around here. She's running the house while I'm focused on the business. We should be grateful for that." "But Dad..." "Not now, Kimberly," he interrupted. "I have a conference call in 6 minutes." The only person who seemed to see through Julie was Grandma. She visited one day and overheard Julie scolding me for leaving a textbook on the coffee table. "This is ridiculous," Grandma snapped. "She's a child, not a soldier in boot camp." What followed was a huge argument. Julie cried to Dad, playing the victim perfectly. "Your mother doesn't respect my role in this family," she sobbed. "How can I can't raise Kimberly properly with you constantly interfering," Julie told Grandma during one of their fights. As usual, Dad took Julie's side. "If you can't support my wife," he said to Grandma, "maybe you should stop coming around for a while." Just like that, Grandma's regular visits ended. But I still found my way to her house after school whenever I could. She only lived 20 blocks away, and those visits became my escape. "Don't let her break your spirit, sweetheart," Grandma would tell me, slipping me $50. "Hide this where she won't find it." I became an expert at hiding things, money, small gifts from Grandma, even my feelings. Under my bed, there was a loose floorboard where I kept my secret stash. Whenever Julie's inspections got worse, I'd touch that floorboard and remind myself that at least one person cared about me. Then came the conversation that changed everything. One night, when I was 16, I went to the kitchen for water and heard voices coming from my parents' room. The door was slightly open, and I froze when I heard Julie's words. "She doesn't deserve to have you pay for her college," Julie was saying. "You've seen her attitude, just like her mother. If you keep spoiling her, she'll turn out the same way, running off and abandoning her family." I held my breath, waiting for Dad to defend me. The silence was unbearable. Maybe you're right," Dad said finally, sounding unsure. "But we did promise." "Promises to ungrateful children don't count," Julie interrupted. "Think about it, darling. We could use that money for our future instead." I didn't stay to hear the rest. Back in my room, I lay awake for hours, Julie's words echoing in my head. I realized her control over Dad would only get stronger. If I wanted a future, I'd have to create it myself. That night, I made a decision. I would work harder than ever. Every free moment would go to studying. I would earn a full scholarship to college, no matter what it took. The next 3 years were a blur of schoolwork, clubs, and competitions. I joined every academic group I could: debate team, science club, math club. Weekends were for studying or traveling to state competitions. Slowly, my trophy shelf filled up. First place in the state science fair. Top speaker at the regional debate championship. Perfect score on the math Olympiad. Julie hated it. Every achievement seemed to annoy her more. But she couldn't complain anymore, not when teachers were calling home to praise me or when local newspapers featured my accomplishments. Finally, graduation day came. I had done it, a full scholarship to West Virginia University in the neighboring state. The acceptance letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier, but I had been waiting for the right moment to share the news. I chose to celebrate with dinner after graduation. thinking that maybe, just for today, even Julie couldn't ruin things. I got into West Virginia, I announced, still wearing my graduation gown. Full academic scholarship. Dad's face lit up. That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. For a moment, everything felt perfect. But then Julie wrapped her arms around Dad's shoulders, and her face shifted into that fake, sweet expression I had grown to hate. "Oh, honey," she cooed. "That's such wonderful news. But you know what would make it even better? If Kimberly learned the value of true independence." Dad turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Well," Julie said, her voice dripping with fake concern, "we shouldn't spoil her too much. The scholarship is great, but maybe she should pay for her own housing, get a job, and learn some responsibility." I stared in disbelief as Dad nodded slowly. "That actually makes sense." Something inside me snapped. All the years of frustration, all the silent suffering, came rushing out at once. "Makes sense?" I stood up so fast my chair toppled over. "Nothing about this makes sense. You've let her control everything for years. She's turned this house into a prison, and you just sit there and nod at whatever she says." "Kimberly," Dad started, but I wasn't done. "You had money saved for my college." "I know you did. I heard you talking about it years ago. But let me guess, Julie, you convinced him to spend it on something else, didn't you? Just like you convinced him to stop letting Grandma visit, to stop being my father." Julie's face turned red with anger. "How dare you?" she screamed, jumping up from her chair. "After everything we've done for you, is this how you show gratitude?" "Gratitude?" I laughed bitterly. "For what? For making my teenage years miserable? For taking away my weekly allowance? For controlling every part of my life?" Julie spun to face Dad, her eyes suddenly filling with tears. "See," she said, her voice shaking. "This is exactly what I've been warning you about. She doesn't respect you at all. All she cares about is money, 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 just like her mother." I watched Dad's face change. His expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. He stood up slowly, his hands trembling. "Get out," he said quietly. I froze, not understanding. "Julie's right," he continued. "You've become just like your mother, selfish, ungrateful, only thinking about yourself. I won't have another woman like that in my house. Pack your things and leave." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Behind Dad's shoulder, I could see Julie smirking. I saw Julie smirk, quickly hidden behind her hand, as if she was pretending to be upset. I ran upstairs to my room, tears streaming down my face. My hands shook as I packed my clothes into a suitcase, grabbed my awards and photos, and emptied the stash I had hidden under the floorboard. Downstairs, I could still hear Julie's voice, pretending to comfort Dad. "It's not your fault, honey. Some people just can't be helped." Grandma's house was only a 20-minute drive away, but it felt like hours. When she opened the door and saw my tear-streaked face, she pulled me into a tight hug. "He kicked me out," I sobbed into her shoulder. "He said I'm just like Mom." "Your father's a fool," she said firmly, helping me carry my bags inside. "But you're not going to let them win. You're stronger than that." I stayed with Grandma all summer, working at a local bookstore to save money. She helped me look for apartments near West Virginia University, and when August came, she handed me an envelope. "It's not much," she said, "but it should cover your first few months' rent. The rest is up to you." College was tough at first. I found a tiny studio apartment I could barely afford and got a job as a waitress at a cafe near campus. My schedule was exhausting: morning classes, afternoons in the library, evening shifts at the cafe, and homework late into the night. But it was worth it. Whenever I felt like giving up, I remembered Julie's smirk, and it pushed me to keep going. The years flew by. I made friends, got top grades, and started building a new life. My phone never rang with calls from home, not on my birthdays, not on holidays, not even when I made the dean's list every semester. The only connection to my old life was Grandma, who called me every Sunday without fail. After graduation, I got a job offer from Anderson and Mitchell, one of the top consulting firms in the city. The starting salary was more than enough for me to rent a nice one-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood. I framed my diploma and hung it next to my job offer letter. Proof that I had made it on my own. I met Henry at a coffee shop near my office. It was such a cliché. I literally bumped into him while rushing to get my morning latte, spilling his drink all over his suit. I insisted on buying him a new one, and somehow, that led to dinner that same evening. Henry was different from anyone I'd ever met. Henry was unlike anyone I had ever met, kind, genuine, and completely devoted to his family. When I met his parents, I saw what a real, loving family looked like for the first time. After a year of dating, Henry took me back to the coffee shop where we first met. Right there, he got down on one knee and pulled out a beautiful diamond ring. "Kimberly," he said, his voice shaking a little, "will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, I said yes. The whole coffee shop cheered and clapped. Later that night, I posted a photo on Instagram. Me showing off the ring, Henry kissing my cheek, and both of us smiling like fools. Exactly 1 week later, I got a call at work. The number was unknown, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I said. "Kimberly," a voice said, sending a chill down my spine. "It's been a while." "Julie." My grip on the phone tightened. "How did you get my number?" "Oh, I have my ways," she said with a soft laugh. "I saw your engagement announcement. Such a lovely ring. You must be so excited to plan the wedding. What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "To help, of course," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Every bride deserves to have her father walk her down the aisle." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a deal, dear. A simple transaction. $50,000, and I'll convince your father to reconcile with you. I'll make sure he's there to walk you down the aisle on your big day." I felt sick. "And if I say no?" She chuckled. "Let's just say your father won't be attending the wedding. You know how he is, he does everything I tell him to do. I manage all our money, and that fool doesn't even question where it goes." Her voice grew smug as she continued. "Remember when I convinced him to kick you out? So easy. Men are such simple creatures. A few tears, the right words, and they'll believe anything. Your father is especially stupid like that." My hand started shaking, but it wasn't from fear. With my other hand, I quietly opened the voice recorder app on my work phone and pressed record. Julie kept talking, spilling details about her years of lies and manipulation. "So," she said finally, "what do you say, dear? 50,000 is a small price to pay for a father's love, isn't it?" I forced my voice to stay steady. "I need to think about it," I said. "Don't take too long." "The offer expires in a week," Julie replied before hanging up. I sat at my desk, staring at the recording on my phone. 10 minutes and 35 seconds of Julie showing her true self. 7 minutes that could change everything. That evening, I played the recording for Henry in our apartment. With every second, his face grew darker. "We need to send this to your father right now," he said, reaching for his phone. I stopped him, placing my hand over his. "No, I have a better idea," I said, smiling as I opened my laptop. "She's always worked so hard to keep up her perfect image. Let's see how she feels when the truth is out there for everyone to see." I uploaded the recording to my social media with a simple caption. "My stepmother's wedding gift demand, $50,000 to let my father walk me down the aisle. Listen to the end." The response was instant. Within hours, the post had hundreds of shares. Comments poured in, many from people who knew Julie personally. "I can't believe this is the same woman who runs our church committee. She told me you abandoned your family. I'm so sorry I believed her. This explains how she got that new car last year." The truth about Julie spread like wildfire through our small town. Her perfect image shattered piece by piece, post by post, share by share. 4 days later, my phone rang. It was Dad. "Can you come home?" he asked, his voice shaky like he'd been crying. "Please, Kimberly. We need to talk." The next day, I made the 5-hour drive back to my childhood home. From the outside, the house looked the same, but something felt different. Julie's fancy SUV wasn't in the driveway, and her prized rose bushes were overgrown. Dad opened the door before I could knock. He looked older, tired, with more gray in his hair than I remembered. We stood there awkwardly for a moment before he pulled me into a tight hug. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. There was no sign of Julie. "She's gone," Dad said, answering the question I hadn't asked. "I kicked her out the day after I heard that recording. I filed for divorce the next morning." He slumped into his favorite armchair, looking defeated. "I've been such a fool, Kimberly. All these years, I was so blind. She manipulated me, turned me against you, against my own mother." His voice cracked. "I believed every lie she told me. I let her destroy our family." Tears rolled down his face as he looked at me. "I threw you out, my own daughter. I chose her over you. How can you ever forgive me?" I sat on the arm of Dad's chair, just like I used to when I was little. "I forgive you, Dad," I said. He looked up, surprised, but I wasn't finished. "I need time. We can't just pretend those years didn't happen. We need to rebuild our relationship slowly." The next 7 months were all about healing, Dad, and I started with weekly phone calls. At first, they felt awkward, but over time, they became more natural. We met for coffee every other weekend, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Henry joining us. Grandma started visiting the house again, and seeing Dad work to rebuild his relationship with her made me believe in second chances. Meanwhile, the divorce went forward. Julie tried to take half of everything, but Dad's lawyer used the recording as proof of her lies and manipulation. In the end, she got far less than she wanted. She moved out of state, and rumors said she was already looking for her next victim, but we never heard from her again. Dad started therapy to work through his guilt and to understand how he had let himself be controlled for so long. During one of our coffee meetings, he shared something that helped me finally understand those lost years. "After your mom left," he said, stirring his coffee, "I was so scared of failing you that I let someone else take over. I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was just running away from my responsibilities as a father." Planning the wedding brought us even closer. Dad insisted on helping with everything, from finding the venue to taste testing cakes. He even joined Henry's family for the rehearsal dinner and fit in perfectly with their warm, lively group. On the morning of my wedding, Dad arrived early at the bridal suite. He looked so handsome in his tuxedo, but his hands were shaking as he knocked on the door. "Ready for this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I was already in my dress, with Grandma adjusting my veil. "I've been ready for this moment my whole life, Dad," I said. He took my hand, and we stood together behind the church doors. The wedding march began to play. "Kimberly," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion, "I know I missed so many important moments in your life, but I promise you, I'll be here for all the ones to come." The doors opened, and we started walking down the aisle. I saw Henry standing at the altar, smiling brighter than ever. I saw our friends and family, all beaming with happiness. Grandma was in the front row, already dabbing at her eyes. But mostly, I felt at peace. I felt my dad's arm steady and strong under my hand, finally being the support I had always needed. At the altar, when the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Dad's voice was clear and confident. "Her grandmother, and I do," he said. Later, at the reception, I saw Dad dancing with Grandma. They were both laughing like they hadn't in years. Henry came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Happy?" he asked. I leaned back against him, taking in the scene, my family, broken and then rebuilt, stronger than I ever thought it could be. People say you can't choose your family, but that's not completely true. Sometimes you have to lose your family to find it again. Sometimes a happy ending isn't about everything being perfect. It's about loving the imperfect pieces and building something new. Julie has been gone from our lives for months now, and good riddance. But in a strange way, I'm almost grateful for what happened. Without the darkness she brought, I might never have realized how strong I could be or felt the joy of rebuilding what was broken.